Today I'm going to do a short video on setting up the Axminster 1628 with the extension bed on it in order to set up the hollowing rig on a very large piece of wood. It's a bed extension that's about 460mm long, and it comes with what I think is an extension post, so that when it's actually mounted on the bed frame of the lathe at the lower level, then you can have the tool post on it, which is what I want to do.
And that's where it's going to go on the lower bed mounting points. So the bolts have to go through the holes in the extension bed and be screwed into the bolts on the frame. Not such an easy task, because the extension bed is rather heavy, and it's not easy to figure out how to get them in and not drop it on your feet. So a bit of ingenuity using an adjustable height stool and a block of wood meant I could take the load off and get the bolts in underneath. Not the easiest thing to do. It took about 10 or 15 minutes altogether. Be quicker the second time round, I would have thought. So that's it in place. Spot the deliberate mistake that I can't actually get very easily out of the garage workshop into the house inside, but I'll soon figure that one out. I can see why some of the competition have swing away lathe beds, or ones that rotate over the back, the very much more expensive ones, because this is something which is sufficient of a faff that I'd try and avoid doing it unless I absolutely have to.
Okay, so I'll tighten the tailstock off, and okay, so that is your increased height banjo-rooney.
So it's becoming obvious to me that I've got to make some adaptations to do what I want to do. The tailstock, which is needed for support for the Woodcut Bowlsaver, is obviously at the lower level, and it can't be aligned with the headstock at the higher level. That's obviously why some of the expensive lathes again have got a drop bed section, so that you can leave the tailstock on the higher level and swing away the centre part of the bed, so you can do things like this without major surgery. Yeah, that's the bit of wood mounted on there, and you can see that there's some challenges involved. Hey ho. With the Bowlsaver mounted in the tool post at the approximate centre height, you can see that I've got no possibility of support from the tailstock.
Okay, well, what I'm going to try is I brought the headstock down. I just put a temporary drive in here to get the height right, so that the it's on dead center for where it will be. I'm going to try now to drill a hole at center there. Well, that's that center. And I have discovered that the Morse taper over here has got a bolt in it, bolt hole through, which I just happen to have a carriage bolt that's the right size. So if I drill a hole clean through the wood, I should be able to then clamp this up on the top, and then I've got to figure out how to clamp it down on the bottom. So in order to do that, as I've got this sitting on the deck, first thing to do is mark where that would come.
So I drilled a hole in the top which allows the Morse taper to go through and expose the threaded hole at the back, which I'm going to put the carriage bolt in. And I also drilled a hole in the bottom that allows me to put a piece of threaded bar through for restraining the piece of wood back to the tailstock. So I'm now going to go and prepare the wood blank for mounting on the lathe and get on and try and turn it and see what adjustments I've got to make as I go. The piece of wood's about 110 deep and about 460, 500 mil in diameter. So I have to use my very big mason's scribes to get the centre marks sorted out. So I put the big faceplate on with 5 screws, making sure it's well fixed, and now need to get it on the lathe. It's quite heavy, so it needs a bit of manipulation to do that.
Don't trap your fingers under there like I did earlier on, because this is not in the usual location. Everything. So
now it's on the headstock. The first step is to true it up and turn a tenon for the 110mm dovetail record power jaws that I'm going to use for the actual bowling out stage. Because it's such a heavy piece of wood, I've tightened up the grub screws on the faceplate because it's perfectly feasible when you turn it off, if you turn it off without dialing the speed down slowly, for the inertia of the bowl to unspin it off the headstock. So better safe than sorry. Then just using the 1/2 inch bowl gouge, doing some push and pull cuts. There was probably about 6 or 7mm out of trueness on the face. Just true it up. This isn't going to be a finished piece because Rance is going to finish it off to his own design. All I'm going to do is get it set up and trued up so that I can core out the bowls with the Woodcut Bowlsaver. So the base quite flat. I'm just going to mark it up now for the tenon, a nice large deep tenon suitable for the large record power jaws, which are a dovetail shape. So I've kind of marked up the 2 dimensions there so I know where the top and the bottom of the dovetail is roughly going to be, and then turn it out. To avoid predetermining the shape of the bowl, I'm not going to profile the base. I'm just taking a space, a chunk out that's big enough for the jaws, leaving the rest of the wood there for Gary to fiddle with as he wishes.
Right, just try the fit. Oh, that looks good.
Best to check the fit before you actually take it off the chuck, just in case it's not right. You can finesse it. So it's quite heavy. Just now turning it around and putting it on the chuck. So with that on, time to remove the faceplate and start preparing for turning the first bowl out. Quickly true up the face.
So the bottom of the bowl is about 10mm in because of the tenon. So mark that up about 10. I've got to get the centre of the bolt to be this distance away from the base of the bowl so that it doesn't go through, which is 140mm.
The dimensions suggested that I needed the centre of the bolt to be about 45mm away from the face in order to core it through, but having measured the radius of the cutter at about 135mm, I decided to set the centre of the bolt about 55mm further out. In other words, I didn't actually use the dimensions on the pre-measured jig. That felt I was going to get too thin a base.
I've set the centre so that it's just about 10 or 15mm away from the pith in the core, because I wanted this to be, the second bolt to be as big as possible, but this is as big as possible because I haven't got the one with the third cutter that goes on the outside. Tried to borrow one, couldn't manage to. So this rig basically has got a hole through here with some spacer blocks, just because that's the size of the bolt that I've got, which allows me to screw into the Morse taper on the top there. Move it around. So that Morse taper goes into a hole in the top. This then bolts through into the shaft. There's a bolt stud all the way through to the outside here, with a bolt not on the outside, not on the outside there. I can't get that vertical because that's as far off the end as it will go without it dropping off. So this is all about the absolute maximum that any of this can do. So now I think it's just a question of giving it a go. Right, 400 RPM.
As you get closer to the core, the sound changes, and eventually the bowl will just pop out like that. The centre point of the rotation was about 15-20mm away from the centre, so the core was about 25-30mm in diameter, which is why it just sheared off. It is possible to set it so that it's a bigger nub in the centre, but then you might have to belt it to actually get it to snap off. And of course that has got the danger of breaking fibres on the base, which I didn't want to do.
Ah, that's good. It's got about 15-20mm at the bottom. Well, this big one is going to make a lovely bowl. Once it's finally turned, you can choose whatever shape you want. You've got a decent tenon, and you've got lots of wood you can play with. Alright, what I've got to do now is I can go back to my normal situation now. I'm going to put the faceplate back on there, turn a tenon on there, and then use a small bowl saver to take one out of there.
So back on the chuck, the slightly smaller sized chuck tenon with the dovetail jaws, and then set the rig up, this time on the main lathe bed. Doesn't need the super duper patented extension system rig. Same procedure as before, eyeball where you want the point of entry for the cutting tip to be, and then set the central point of the main bolt up so that you get the right distance and you don't core through the bottom. Pretty important to do that. As it's the smaller cutter, there's less vibration, and the cutting action is pretty easy and pretty simple. But even so, there's still enough vibration on the system to require you to wear earplugs. And also, in this case, as you can see, the slave cutter, the one that's not being used, has actually managed to vibrate itself loose. So I did stop and remove that and finish the cut with it off the rig. This time I got to it before it came off. Not that it can go anywhere because the Bowlsaver platform's in the way. It can't fly off anywhere. So there we have it. There's all three bowls. I wish I'd been able to get a larger core out the middle, but I don't think I could have done so with the rig at the limit as it was with all the DIY jiggery pokery.